election espionage. They're gathering information, but they're never going to put it back out. It's not going to hit WikiLeaks. It's not going to do any of that. So they sort of know it, but they don't really want to talk about it out loud, and they don't want to warn anybody, and they don't really know what the implications are. And that's all the way into the summer of 16. But by the fall, certainly...
The alarm bells are going off.
Yeah, describe. What's happening?
Well, first of all, there's that intelligence report that says unambiguously in October, a month before the election, that the Russians are doing this, and they're doing this with nefarious goals in mind. In September, on the sidelines of the APEC conference in China, Obama pulls aside Putin and says, cut this out. We know what you're doing, cut it out. And some people want to believe that things stopped after that, and some of the operations did kind of calm down, and others escalated. The other problem is that the Obama administration was looking at different things. They were worried about the infrastructure. They were worried about voter rolls. They were worried about voting machines and about the voting infrastructure and vote tallies being manipulated. They weren't looking at the misinformation, the disinformation campaign that was being channeled through WikiLeaks and then unintentionally weaponized by the American press. They were zigging when the Russians were zagging. So that was a big problem. The other thing is that the Obama administration expected Hillary to win, and then it would be her problem, and she would deal with it. And they were afraid that if they weighed in now, it would look like they're really putting their thumbs on the scale of the American election, and that they would just be helping the Russians delegitimize the integrity of this election. This is a kind of a classic case of the Obama administration overthinking something while the Russians were just kind of punching them in the gut.
So what should Obama have done? What could he have done? You know Putin, you know the Russian ethos. What does the President of the United States do at that moment?
I think the things he did in the winter, the sanctions, the DNI report that really spelled things out, that should have been done in the summer. I think it would have had a totally different effect.
Why didn't he? What's your guess?
Well, I think they thought it wasn't going to have a real impact, and I think they thought Clinton was going to win. The Russians thought Clinton was going to win. They didn't expect Trump to win. We're projecting backwards. We're projecting strength backwards onto the Russians. The Russians did not think this was going to... my father, who grew up, he's only 7 years younger than Putin, and grew up in the mean streets of the Moscow suburbs. And, he's like, I recognize this type. I know this type of guy that Putin is. The analogy he drew was, you're the young, scrawny kid on the block, and the big, strapping jock is walking down the street, and you stick your foot out to trip him. You're not thinking several steps in advance. You don't know what the point of tripping him is necessarily, but boy, is it funny when he falls down and busts his nose and it's bleeding everywhere and he's in pain, and you can laugh at him because he sure looks ridiculous now. But then he doesn't expect that when he sticks his foot out, the guy's going to fall over, break his neck, end up a quadriplegic, have massive medical bills, crippling the soccer team or whatever he was on. You were just trying to bloody his nose a little bit. But now everybody thinks that you're this big, strong guy and you have this really elaborate plan in place. You were just sticking your foot out to trip him. And I think the danger here is overestimating. You don't want to underestimate their strength, but you also don't want to overestimate their capabilities and their ability to plan and to inflict damage. Like, a lot of the damage is self-inflicted.
When they see each other, what does Putin see in Trump, and what do you imagine Trump sees in Putin?
They see him as not Hillary and not the Republican establishment, both of which hate Russia, assume the worst about Russia, and frankly see through Russia, see through Putin, and know what he's up to, and know what he will be up to if he had his druthers. Trump is unsophisticated about Russia and seems to like strongmen. The things he said about the Chinese in Tiananmen Square, the nice things he said about Putin, that he's a strong leader, unlike our guy. So Putin probably sees him as, at least it's not those people. Plus, there's a lot of sexism towards Hillary Clinton. You talk to people who are close to the Kremlin, and they say, that crazy old bat, we know her. We don't want to deal with her anymore. She hates us with an irrational hatred. This guy at least has a fresh perspective. He's a businessman. He respects strong men. We could do business with him. Now I think Putin sees him as a profoundly weak and gullible president. Weak because he can't seem to wrest himself from the clutches of the establishment that's kind of swallowing him whole with this Russia investigation. In the spring and summer of 2017, even as Trump is sinking into the morass of this Russia investigation, the Russians are still hoping, hope against hope, that they can arrange a one-on-one meeting between Putin and Trump, knowing, they have a good read on him. Trump calls, through the whole campaign, calls China a currency manipulator, and that the first thing he's going to do when he gets into office is label them a currency manipulator. He meets once with Xi Jinping over a beautiful piece of chocolate cake, no longer a currency manipulator. NATO, obsolete through the whole campaign. They're not paying their fair share. It's obsolete. It's terrible. It's outdated. He meets with Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, no longer obsolete. He seems to be very susceptible to these personal meetings. If somebody's simpatico, if they can, talk mano a mano, it'll all be okay. And the Russians are hoping at this point that they can achieve that with Trump, that they can meet him, flatter him in person, give him some gifts, do whatever the Russian analog is of the Saudi sword dance, and that they can get whatever they want from him.
Anything else?
And then I gotta go.
I know.